Good evening and welcome to our webinar, Studying or Volunteering Abroad with Tourette Syndrome. My name is Angela Sullivan, Medical Project Specialist, and I will be your moderator this evening. This webinar is being provided as part of the Tourette Health and Education Program, a program of the Tourette Association of America in partnership with the CDC. During the webinar, we would be very happy to hear from you and include your voice in the conversation. You may ask questions or share comments using the questions panel on the right side of your GoToWebinar player at any time. We will collect your questions and answer them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. I would like to mention that funding for this webinar was made possible by our cooperative agreement with the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views expressed by speakers and moderators do not necessarily reflect the official policies of the Department of Health and Human Services, nor does the mention of trade names, commercial practices, or organizations imply endorsement by the U.S. government. Before we get started, I wanted to take a few minutes to share some information about the Tourette Association of America. At the TAA, we are dedicated to making life better for all people affected by Tourette syndrome and tic disorders through efforts that raise awareness, advance research and understanding, and provide support. Awareness, research, and support are the three main pillars of our organization, and through these, we provide our community with many resources. Through social media, public relations, and news placement, as well as our youth ambassadors located across the country, we raise awareness of Tourette syndrome. This is also done through advocacy and lobbying on Capitol Hill for continued funding. By providing grants and fellowships to both young investigators and other professionals, we can advance research and support clinical trials on Tourette syndrome and new treatment options. The TAA has a network of chapters and support groups across the country that provide support at the state level for their communities. In addition to this, programs at the TAA, such as online support groups, webinars like the one that you'll hear this evening, the biennial conference, and in-person presentations, we provide support to our constituents. With that said, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers this evening, Justin Harford, Jane Hamilton, and her mom, Sarah Hamilton. Justin Harford is a project coordinator with the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange, working to increase the participation of people with disabilities in international exchange by providing information and resources to both individuals with disabilities and international professionals. Previously, Justin worked for 2 years in disability community organizing and policy in the foothills of Northern California. He received his Bachelor of Arts in Latin American History and Spanish Literature from University of California, Berkeley. He studied abroad at the Pontifical Catholic University in Santiago, Chile, where he researched and wrote a thesis on the history of the blind in Chilean society. In 2008, he spent 10 weeks immersing himself in the culture and language of Mayacoan, Mexico. Jane Hamilton is a high school senior who was chosen as the Minnesota Youth Ambassador for the Tourette Association of America in 2017. Jane is an active Tourette syndrome advocate and accomplished public speaker. Their advocacy has been highlighted on many news outlets, including the TV show Inside Edition. Jane is also interested in modeling, acting, music, video editing, and science. Her passion in languages enabled her to learn Japanese on her own, leading to the studying abroad in Hiroshima summer 2018. Jane is currently a research intern at the University of Minnesota Converging Approaches to Neurodevelopment Lab, where she studies ways to use technology to engage the TS community in research. Sarah Hamilton is a film producer, marketing strategist, and business consultant who has held principal roles in innovative, industry-leading firms and organizations around the country, from startups and boutiques to Fortune 500 companies and nonprofits. She's also a dedicated volunteer advocate and devoted parent of an incredible teenage daughter with Tourette syndrome. As an accomplished speaker, workshop facilitator, and executive member of the Tourette Association of America's Minnesota chapter, Sarah has been raising awareness for Tourette and other neurological conditions throughout the state and around the country through meetings, presentations, and media outreach. So without further ado, Justin, please go ahead and start the presentation.
Thanks, Angela. So as Angela mentioned, I am a project coordinator with the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange. The National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange, or NCDE, or Clearinghouse, we say them all, is a project of the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. It's designed to increase the participation of people with disabilities in international exchange between the United States and other countries and it is supported by my employer, Mobility International USA. And as Angela said, the way that we do this is we share information about international exchange and disability, both for disabled people who want to study abroad or volunteer abroad for that matter, and also for, and probably mostly for, exchange professionals who can do a lot, have done a lot, and can do even more to make their programs more welcoming and inclusive of people with all kinds of different disabilities, including Tourette syndrome. And you can find more information about us at www.miusa.org. And now I'm just going to quickly go through here, and I'm kind of trying to just give a summary of what are some of the things to think about with studying abroad, and kind of try to bear with me. Some of this is directed at professionals, some of it at individuals and exchange professionals or individuals. But I think that all the information on all the slides will be useful for both those who are looking to go abroad, but also those looking to support those looking to go abroad. So just very quickly, and I realize we all know this, Tourette syndrome is a neurodevelopmental disorder resulting in involuntary motor and vocal tics. Tics can include rolling eyes, banging knees together, whistling, sniffing, and also clearing throat. And you can find more information at the Tourette Association website, that is tourette.org. An important thing on the next slide is comorbid conditions. And this is important because, of course, Tourette syndrome itself may be a pretty small part, but many reasonable accommodations for international exchange may relate to comorbid conditions, which include obsessive compulsive disorder, ADHD, mental health, and also executive functioning. And again, there's a link where you can read about comorbid conditions at the TAA website, and available on the presentation. I believe you'll be able to download the presentation afterwards to access that link. Now, to start with, on the next slide, we just kind of start with some general tips. And it says tips for studying abroad with CS. In reality, I think these are probably tips for studying abroad with anyone. And when I say study abroad, I kind of mean more broadly in the sense it could be international exchange, it could be studying, it could be volunteering, it could be interning. And so before you start with your journey, you want to figure out, what is your why? Do you want to study a language? Do you want to take classes towards a major or towards your general requirements? Or maybe you want to do a volunteer project, or maybe you want to teach a course abroad. So there's a variety of different kinds of things that you can do abroad. And so starting off with that why to get a sense of what you want to accomplish. And again, tips for anybody, focus on what your goals are, and don't start right away with worrying about what country is right for my disability. Next, once you figured that out, you meet with an advisor, either with your university or I mentioned here with the consortium. Universities can provide international exchange programs, but also there are consortiums like, for example, Youth for Understanding, YFU, which you'll be hearing about in a short bit. And then after you've spoken with an advisor, you start to gather details on the programs that the advisor shared with you. And I actually have a few bullet points about this, basically saying the same thing, which is to do extensive research. And you can research through talking to your advisor, maybe connecting with the host center, connecting with disabled people's organizations, either of Tourette syndrome or also of comorbid conditions. And finally, focus on the experiential as much as the studying. My parents, when I wanted to study abroad in Chile, they said, why do you want to study abroad at a university that's probably not as good as UC Berkeley? The credits aren't going to be equivalent. And in a sense, they were right. I was taking classes that were lower division, even though I should have been taking upper division. But it was really more about the experience. And so, and I think that's actually something that Jane's going to tell you about in a short bit as well. Now, on the next slide, what are some of the questions you should ask while you're doing this extensive research process? Well, first of all, like, who are you going to be studying with? Are you going to be studying with American students, host country students, other international students from other countries, maybe a mix? How will outings be organized? Will you be able to receive academic credits? I'm surprised, since I've been working at the organization where I'm at, that there are some programs where you can spend a semester abroad and not necessarily get academic credit. And so it's important to ask that if you're thinking about taking a course or two abroad. Financial aid, kind of tying into financial to credit, is can you get financial aid to study abroad, either through your financial aid package with your university or from your consortium. Sometimes consortia offer funding options. And are there scholarships to study abroad? And also, what is the policy to request reasonable accommodations? The programs will have different rules for that. And specifically, too, you can even ask specific questions about reasonable accommodations, like will there be chances for rest, a quiet space to work, or your own housing situation, for example. On the next slide, we talk about kind of some general tips, kind of maybe more for practitioners, and to understand, you know, responding or not responding to tics. Tics are involuntary, and so our first tip is to ignore tics if possible. If tics can't be ignored, the person with Tourette syndrome in a meeting or a class in certain situations, you can just ask for the option, and the teacher can give the option to just step out and release tics outside. And allow remote participation. This may work for some situations as well. In flights, so airlines can be alerted when somebody with Tourette syndrome, or really any kind of disability, is going to be traveling. Airlines do tend to want you to alert them. Each airline will have a page on travel with a disability where they'll give you relevant contact information. If the student is an adult, I believe they should and they may have to contact directly the airlines. I don't see why an advisor couldn't join them on the phone for that. And if it's about a minor, I think other people I expect would be able to do that. Pre-boarding is available. So we mentioned comorbid conditions. If you experience anxiety boarding with a crowd, pre-boarding is an option. So you can get on and have more time and not be crowded by other people. And then flight crew can facilitate understanding with other passengers. And of course, individuals can facilitate understanding themselves by, of course, just explaining to other passengers, and also by using the I have TS cards, which are available for download from the TAA website. And we talk about providing structure in programs. So making sure that people with, for example, executive functioning disabilities have a clear concept, and everybody really has a clear concept of what's going to happen in the program. So structure can include a syllabus of courses, of assignments, of tests with corresponding dates, so that it's easy to clearly get a sense of where the course is going to be going. A schedule, so that way individuals can see where are the breaks at, so it's possible to plan ahead. Code of conduct and information on what are the expectations for example, in class, and also not just a code of conduct, but also that ties in with the reasonable accommodation policy, and what kinds of reasonable accommodations can be made to enable somebody to follow the code of conduct. And finally, a list of resources, including on-site staff, disabled people's organization, medical clinics, etc. Now, and here's just kind of a quick list of some academic reasonable accommodations. Most of these can be arranged. These can be arranged pretty easily abroad. Extra time on tests, a distraction-free workspace, a note taker, the option to take breaks. I'm sure many of you probably are familiar with these. Medications on the next slide. So this is important, and I know TAA could be managed, Tourette syndrome can be managed with medications, but also there are comorbid conditions that can be managed with medications. And before you travel abroad with medications, it's important to understand what are the host country importation rules on medications. And we typically, once you get a sense of that, we typically advise that an individual takes a 90-day supply with them. For many medications, your own insurer in the United States will give you a 90-day travel supply, and many people find this to be the best option rather than maybe dealing with local medical systems, which may not always be a viable option. But on the other hand, I know too, many exchange programs are longer than 90 days, and also with certain of these medications, doctors sometimes won't allow you to get a 90-day get a 90-day supply. And so, if the program is longer, or if you can't get a 90-day supply, the program hopefully should be able to support you and programs ought to be able to support individuals with finding local providers who can work with the individual on continuing their treatment regimen. And the last thing is just when it comes to pre-existing conditions, travel insurance is not bound by the same rules to not discriminate on the basis of coexisting conditions. Many travel insurance plans will cover an individual with a pre-existing condition, but only other things, not the condition itself. And so that's why it's important to ask if it's possible / necessary to purchase a waiver. And a waiver is basically an add-on to a travel insurance plan to get coverage for pre-existing condition. And you can also check too with your home insurance if they have a sort of a travel insurance add-on that you could purchase. And on the next slide, kind of continuing this strand of medications. So I mentioned about checking importation rules. This is important because in many countries, medications to manage chronic pain or ADHD, something that comes up a lot, for example, is Adderall or Ritalin. Those medications in many countries are illegal to bring with you, illegal to send through the mail. And in certain small exceptions, they're even illegal to bring with you, even when you've legally obtained them elsewhere. And Japan is something that we've advised on quite a lot that falls into this category. And I believe Thailand is another one. And in order to get a sense of what your host country's rules are around this, a great place to start is with the International Narcotics Control Board, or INCB. They have a great online traveler resource where countries share with the INCB what their policies are on drugs that may be considered narcotics. And usually the letter will at least tell you if there are certain kinds of classifications that are restricted, and they should give you a resource, if they don't already give you a list, on where you can find out what those specific medications are. However, of course, it can still be difficult to find even with an official letter from a country. Sometimes those letters are pretty vague. And so I found that consulates and embassies, both U.S. consulates and embassies and host country consulates and embassies, can be a great resource for following up, saying, hey, I checked with the INCB, they have these rules, I just wanted to get some clarification. When I was advising a student on going to Japan, I found that contacting the Japanese consulate that was closest to me was very helpful. And even though they weren't the right resource for me to reach out to, they ended up connecting me with the right resource right away. So I was able to ask questions about specific medications. And if importation is not going to be an option, it could be possible, or even purchasing it isn't going to be an option, it could be possible to get on to an alternative medication. I knew we feature a student on our website who moved from Adderall to Concerta. I've heard of others who, if it was just a shorter program, like a couple weeks, they just went without. So that's something that we definitely recommend you take up with your doctor. Now, how do you identify a medical practitioner if you're going to need one in the host country? Well, you can identify practitioners through a variety of different resources, including travel insurers, your practitioners in the United States. For example, when I traveled, I asked my eye doctor, I have congenital glaucoma, by the way, I asked about references to doctors in the host country. Online search for clinics can be a great option. I advised someone a while back with narcolepsy, and I was actually able to find a narcolepsy clinic in Chile, and I was able to share that resource with them. So definitely online can be a good way. And host program resources. I think all host programs, all study abroad exchange programs ought to have even a basic resource, at least, of providers abroad. Maybe not specialists, but psychiatrists, psychologists, general practitioners. And if they can't give you a direct referral to somebody, they should give you a referral to somebody who can refer you. So we've spoken with many students who, thinking of, again, that person with ADHD who studied abroad in Japan, she got help from her exchange program to find a provider. And, I just share here too, disabled people's organizations. That could be helpful in some cases. And, of course, I've also heard of individuals, for example, if it was about mental health, continuing to receive services from their provider in the United States. The APA, American Psychological Association, has in the past provided guidance suggesting that providers should not give services across state lines. And my sense of this is that it's to prevent practitioners from competing with people in other states. But I've asked questions. I've asked around about this, and my sense of it is that you can check with your provider. And this isn't a law. This is just guidance. So I've still heard of providers that have provided, continued to provide services remotely. And it works, for example, with therapy. So, and finally, my last bit that I'm just going to talk about, I've talked a little bit about it already, but just funding. Funding is the number one thing that everybody, of course, wants to know about, which is understandable because studying or volunteering abroad is expensive. And fortunately, there can be many ways to pay. And the colleges, for example, of course, you already come with a financial aid when you're in college. And if you're getting credit, you can usually take your financial aid with you. I mentioned before, consortium providers like Youth for Understanding may offer certain support of their own. Usually it's kind of individual scholarships. It's worth sharing that you can go abroad directly with a consortium provider, like what Jane did. You can also go through a consortium through your university. Many universities will contract with consortium providers to provide the more extensive, longer-term programs. So, for example, if it's about like spending a year in Paris, you might want to check and see who's providing that. It might not be your university. It might be CIEE or ISEP or IES. So, if you might check, then once you've seen who the provider is that's doing the program in concert with your college, and so go to their website and see if they offer any specific scholarships too. So it's also worth mentioning too that there are government and private foundations that offer scholarships. A really great private foundation scholarship is the Fund for Education Abroad, which offers scholarships to students from underrepresented backgrounds, including people of color, people LGBTQ, people who are from first-generation backgrounds. They don't give special preference for disability. They don't consider that to be an underrepresented background, but your disability can definitely enhance your experience and your story. And you should also check to see the other identities that they focus on, because if you fall into one of those groups, that can help you too. And the Gilman Award is a great federal government award. It's actually provided by the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, the same entity that pays for us, and that's a great resource. And I just kind of want to say one thing, a pro tip. First of all, try to do a program for credit if you're going to study abroad, because it's easier to not only fund it, but also it's more efficient. You end up, you can get credit for your classes. And if you haven't enrolled in a college yet, I definitely recommend checking with your college where you plan to enroll if you want to study abroad, to make sure that they allow you to get credit for your programs. Because years ago, when I studied abroad with the UC education system in California, I just totally took for granted that I could just transfer my classes back and towards my history and Spanish literature. And I've learned since then that that's not something to be taken for granted. That's not what all colleges are not doing that. So that could be something that could be important for somebody wishing to learn more about studying abroad and interested in studying abroad, to check before saying yes to that college acceptance letter. And finally, profellow.com is an excellent resource for learning about funding opportunities, scholarships, fellowships, etc. I would encourage anybody, if you think you might want to study or volunteer abroad, even within the next 5 years, even if you're not ready right now, to just get on their newsletter, because she does a great job at just giving you an amazing outline of all kinds of opportunities. I've been in this for 4 years, and I still am surprised at just the things that she comes up with on her newsletter. So it can just get you starting to think about, wow, there's so many things out there, and that can help you decide ultimately what you're going to do in the next 5 years. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off now to Jane and Sarah. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Justin. And I didn't know, Angela, I know you already gave us an introduction, so and said everything about Jane. So I just wanted to say hi. I'm Jane's mom, and we're turning it over to Jane so she can talk with you a little bit about her experience studying abroad.
Hi. Sorry. I don't really know where to start. There's a lot to talk about, but yeah. Because this is the title slide for this. But on the next slide, so basically it was my dream to go to Japan. I had always grown up around like Japanese culture and things like that, and speaking, well, I mean, I didn't grow up speaking Japanese, but my parents took a Japanese class in college and things like that. And so basically I had always really liked the culture and everything. And so one year I just decided that I wanted to learn Japanese. And then it kind of came to us that maybe I could study abroad. And so we did a whole bunch of research and everything, and a lot of different programs. They would not consider taking me in simply because I had Tourette syndrome or I took meds. Um, there are plenty of study abroad programs who do not allow people to study abroad if they've been in therapy at any point within the past 2 years. So that can be really difficult. But Youth for Understanding was the only program that really actually decided to let me go. And so we got our first email from my host mom, and she kind of gave us, a couple of things that we might not think to pack. She said, like, in the email, she said, like, we need to pack a pair of white shoes for the gym class at my school, which I ended up not even attending because there was actually a typhoon during my time. But yeah. And then we went over to Chicago for like this little pre thing. And then we flew over to Japan with everyone. So this is me and my host mom. She's really nice. I stayed with this family in Hiroshima, and they were very nice and welcoming. Everyone in the neighborhood was super nice. They treated me like I was very special. I felt very special. So
On the next.
yeah, on the next slide, um, there's me and my host mom, and then me and my host grandma. Sometimes it is hard to like, if you have sensory issues or things like that, it's hard to be like, exploring things and trying different foods and things like that. Um, and so, it takes a little bit of bravery, but once you try it, it's actually really good. That's one really cool thing about traveling around the world and like going to different countries and things like that is it's just things are so different everywhere you go. Even if you go, a little bit upstairs to Canada, there are so many different things about any different country that you go to. So, on the next slide, there's me at like the little mall that we went to in Hiroshima City. And then there's one time we had a little party, like a little house party, and we invited all the neighbor kids over too, and they all really loved me, and I played with them and everything. It was a lot of fun. And then on the next slide, this is the school that I went to. So basically, everyone there was really nice. There was a teacher who he was from America, and he was able to kind of guide me through everything because I didn't speak enough Japanese to be sitting in classes and things like that. And so instead, I would like he would say, "Hey, let's go into this other room, and then I'll just show you like, a Japanese movie that's all in Japanese, and then we'll see how well you can translate it." And then he'll just kind of give me little grammar lessons and things like that. And because of a typhoon that happened, like I said, we couldn't do the tea ceremony. And so they actually were super nice enough to set a little tea ceremony up for me before I left. So that's what's happening on the right. So, and then on the next slide, there are little notes that my friends wrote for me afterwards. So right before I left the school, um, basically they gave me like this little book, and my classmates in my little homeroom, they wrote me a bunch of notes with like some inside jokes and things like that. So they're really nice. And then, oh yeah, also in Japanese school, you are not allowed to wear makeup. I was very insecure, so I wore a little tiny bit of concealer under my eyes because I have really bad dark circles. Um, but yeah, basically, you're not allowed to wear makeup. Sometimes it's hard to, like, you know, assimilate to the different, like, cultures and things like that, but you get really used to it. In Japan, there's a part of the house called the genkan, which is like right before you actually enter the house. It's like a little mudroom or whatever. And it's just this little tiny spot where you have to take off your shoes before you step off of it. And so there was one time when, because it's very hard, it's like this crazy acrobatic trick to try to put on your shoes without touching the actual house floor. So there were a couple times I messed up, but luckily people everywhere are really understanding. On the next slide, this is all about the typhoon that happened. So it was a Friday night in July. I had just come home from school and we were just done having dinner. We were chilling out, watching some TV and talking in the living room. And then we all got this notification on our phones that said that there's a typhoon warning and that we need to like pack up everything and seek shelter. And so my host mom told me to basically pack up my little gym bag, and then we were going to go to the shelter in 20 minutes. So that was pretty scary. Um, and then the next slide. So that's the second picture is the picture of the announcement that we got. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, there's not really much to explain on this slide, but it's just, yeah, me talking about it. And then once again, this is some more stuff about the typhoon. Basically, the school that I was going to, it closed for a couple of weeks, and everything was closed, the roads were closed and everything. So it was really hard, but we made it through. It's okay. And then on the next slide, yeah. So then after that, we they kind of, because of the typhoon's effects, 2 weeks before we like left back for America, I was taken to a different part of Japan called Okayama, and when I went there, it was a little bit more traditional, and basically, yeah, I lived with an older woman and she was nice. And I got a little bit more of like the traditional Japanese experience. Whilst in Hiroshima, I got more of like the, modern Japanese experience. So, and then the next slide. Yep. Then basically we received a travel alert. So I, I decided to go back home. So, yeah, that's pretty much the whole story there. Um,
So Jane went through a lot, and as a lot of people with Tourette, or if you have students with Tourette, as you may know, anxiety often ramps up a lot of symptoms. So but as Jane and I were talking, we thought we wanted to put together a couple tips for studying abroad. And one of the first that, we really thought is preparation is essential. And Jane was really good about this. She learned as much as possible about the host country. I mean, she taught herself Japanese. She learned about the geography and the culture and the etiquette. And she was even communicating and texting with some of her, people beforehand, talking with her host family and talking with the school as well. So much before she went. And, again, we said when the heightened tics when they're stressed, so it was really helpful to be prepared. And then, knowing your challenges is important. So beforehand, we had talked with Jane's doctor and therapist and educational consultants and said, what are you thinking about, Jane studying abroad? And that's also one of the reasons that we chose for her to go for a summer, at least to start, rather than going for a full semester. That was a really important idea because we wanted to let her have that experience without, having to ship her off for a long time in case she did have some kind of challenges that were going to be difficult. Understanding her medication was important, and as Justin mentioned previously, a lot of countries like Japan, we had to fill out a lot of forms and get everything approved about a month beforehand before she traveled, and have all of the documentation there at the airport. And you know, I know Jane also made sure that she took an extra large suitcase so she can take her own pillow and blanket because and I think that's important for a lot of people who have sensory issues along with Tourette. So and being flexible is important. I think, you know, Jane definitely had to be flexible because of all the changes that she had with the typhoon and them moving her to different families and everything. But you know, one of the reasons we chose to work with Youth for Understanding, or YFU, is because they were very supportive and very communicative, and they were, you know, really, really good about saying, okay, here's what's going to happen and here's what we're going to do. So again, yeah, we tried the shorter summer program rather than semester, and I think that was a really great thing. And YFU did, after Jane wrote the essay and everything for her application, they did give her a really good scholarship. So Justin mentioned the scholarships that are offered by many programs, and that was definitely very helpful. And then obviously with being flexible, you can plan as much as you want, but things still happen. I mean, who would have thought that, you know, the first time, or, you know, she goes abroad, a typhoon would have hit. So on the final slide, I know Jane wanted to say, go ahead, Jane.
So basically, Tourette's isn't just one part of you, like the slide says. It shouldn't even like be a super huge part of your identity or anything. I mean, you should really just be able to unfiltered experience everything, and that's really important. And you know, just be sure to be really open about some of the challenges you may face. Be open with the people you are staying with, things like that. If you have some sensory issues, be sure to, you know, in the best way you can, if there's a language barrier, tell your, you know, host family that you might have some sensory issues with food or with certain textures or things like that. Yeah, because I mean, if you can talk about it as much as you can, because a lot of these other countries, they don't have as much awareness about, you know, neurological things like Tourette syndrome. And so, you know, bringing awareness to it is really, really important.
And yeah, and as we said, having a sense of humor and adventure is always critical. So yeah, again, for the next slide, we wanted to just give a summary of some tips on setting up the exchange program. You know, it definitely helps if you do have a teenager who has Tourette. You know, working one-on-one with them to investigate a bunch of different programs online, looking at the different requirements and different kind of experiences that they offer is critical. Examining the attitude of the host country toward Tourette and other mental health differences is also important. But you know, having said that, a lot of people said to us, "Oh, I don't know, we should go to Japan because, you know, they don't really have a lot of, you know, capacity for or understanding of Tourette and any, you know, any kind of anxiety and things like that." But
and I said that's exactly why I'm going, because I want to help that.
That's right.
Yeah.
So and I think it really does just matter about how much you communicate. So again, ensure that the country, the host family, and the school is going to accept medications, accommodations, and support. And, you know, speaking of accommodations, that's another reason why we thought the summer program was preferable, because that way we didn't have to worry as much about, you know, worrying about accommodations in the school, because she was really just auditing the classes and enjoying the experience rather than getting the credit for it. Accommodations, though, on the travel were important. I worked with Youth for Understanding, and they said, well, all, we're part of the program plan, and the payment was that everybody sits in these, seats in the back of the plane, and, and they can't choose a seat or whatever. So, we fortunately were in the position where we were able to contact the airline and talk with them, and we paid for Jane to make sure she had a window seat, kind of a little bit further up, and was able to get on earlier, and she was able to have the kind of meals and things that she needed. So we thought that was important. And then, again, things will happen, and but we need to trust the program, make it happen. And then one other thing we wanted to mention was that on the next slide is that we also, like in preparation for Jane going abroad on her own, we went the summer before with a program called Global Volunteers, and together Jane and I went to Poland for 2 weeks and taught at a summer camp near Warsaw. And places like Global Volunteers are amazing. They have phenomenal family volunteers opportunities, like even for younger kids. And that was an amazing learning experience, and it was great for me to be able to, work with Jane to figure out, how she would adapt to the differences in cultures and, traveling abroad. So, and it lessened a little bit of the anxiety on her, which was good. And then because of having that experience, we felt so much more comfortable doing the exchange program, and letting Jane go off on her own, and she had much more confidence as well. So that's all I have for those things.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for an excellent presentation. We are now going to begin doing the question and answer period of the presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit your questions through the questions pane in the control panel. If we're unable to get to everyone's questions, or if you have questions after the fact, here at the Tourette Association, we do have a full-time information and referral staff who can answer your questions as well by emailing support@tourette.org or giving us a call at 1-888-4-TOURETTE. So let me see what we have for questions. So a question that I have is, Justin, you can feel free to answer this too, and Jane, you can chime in. How long in advance would you say that you should plan your study abroad experience? So say you are a freshman in college and are interested in studying abroad, how far out should you plan to do so?
I mean, honestly, so I studied abroad summer of 2018, and when we first started deciding that we wanted to do it, I think it was like fall 2017. So maybe like, if you're like in a rush, maybe like a little less than a year or something like that.
But yeah, and a lot of colleges, depending on where the person who asked the question, depending on where they go to college, their college study abroad office will have a lot of fantastic information about, what they recommend as to, signing up and working with, because each program is going to be different. If you're doing it on your own, like we did, because I wish that we would have known Justin and had contacted the TAA, we kind of just did all this investigation on our own, thinking we didn't have any resources. But it's so fantastic to know that there are the resources available through Tourette Association and through MIUSA, and places that we can really provide some additional help and support.
This is Justin. Yeah, and I would just second that starting a year in advance of planning is probably a good rule of thumb. And I'd also add to making sure if you're thinking about studying abroad through your college, just kind of start by looking at programs through your college. I made the mistake of looking at different countries, looking at all the countries in South America, and first starting with that, where do I want to go? And then I realized that there were only a couple countries that we're actually on the list. So it's better to start with the programs and from that angle. And also I would add too, we have an email inbox, clearinghouse@miusa.org, where people can send questions about disability and international exchange. So we can do a little bit of footwork for you to try kind of brainstorm with you and help with that planning process.
And that would have been so great for us, Justin. And you know what? If Jane, I think Jane's planning to go study abroad again. She's going to be entering college in the fall. So we will definitely be working with you guys. One other thing I just wanted to add for that question is it also depends on your knowledge of the language of the country you're going to. For instance, some places will require a full year of language study in order to study there, study for a semester or a year abroad. And so it's important to kind of have a better feel for what is your comfort level with the language? And again, if you don't have experience with the language, but you still really want to study abroad, that's why, sometimes a shorter summer program is an option.
Great, thank you so much. So we have a question. Are there study abroad opportunities for high school students with Tourette syndrome? Jane and Sarah, you mentioned that you kind of did all this research on your own. In your research, did you find many different types of programs for high school students? And did you find anything that was specific for children or teens with Tourette?
What a fantastic question. We did not know, we kind of we did do a lot. There are a ton of programs that do offer exchange students or exchange programs for high school students. AFS is another fantastic one. I know, Justin, probably you have a much longer list. We went through and just looked up everything online, looked at each one of the organizations, looked at their history, how long have they been doing this, what are their reviews, looked on not just their website, but other places for reviews, and then also asked for recommendations. And the reason that we chose Youth for Understanding was because they were willing to, as Jane mentioned before, sometimes there are some restrictions. So if you've been seeing a therapist anytime in the past 2 years, and you have that down on your thing, a lot of programs will say, you know what, they automatically will just kind of say, oh, nope, can't do it. So it's important to look at some of those things. You can also, say, hey, if I was doing CBIT or, something like that, it doesn't really, you can explain what you were doing that for, but also medication wise. Sometimes they have like the health questions are sometimes important. So every single place is different, but we had success with Youth for Understanding. I don't know, Justin, if you have recommendations on that.
Yeah, you guys actually picked a great provider. Probably if you had emailed clearinghouse@miusa.org, we would have probably shared them as one of them that we know. We don't know of any providers that specifically offer exchange programs for students or individuals with Tourette. However, like you said, there's a lot of other programs that welcome individuals with Tourette to join them. And I would add also that even if you're not necessarily doing a Tourette-specific exchange, that there are certainly ways to make an international exchange disability-specific if you're interested in doing that. There's always disabled people's organizations in other countries. You can imagine, for example, a counterpart to the TAA. And so when you study abroad, you can reach out and you can meet people through those community connections. Sometimes if you reach out to people with your disability, that can make it easier for you to actually get a social in. Whereas I found it, for me, it was harder for my sighted peers to maybe get into the culture quite so easily. For me, it was pretty easy to get in through my disability. And I would also say too that I mentioned volunteering, and of course Jane and Sarah volunteered with the Global Volunteers Program, and which I'd love to learn more about that. But there's a huge need for volunteers who have disabilities including Tourette. And because oftentimes volunteerism, we can think about disabled people as being always in need of help, and there's a lot of volunteer projects that include disabled people as the recipients rather than as the providers of help. And so I think that there's a huge need in the programs like Peace Corps, for example, and cross-cultural solutions. Those are two volunteer providers. Peace Corps, of course, is the more famous one. There's a huge need in those kinds of projects for the perspectives and lived experiences of people with disabilities.
That's such a great comment. And Justin, you brought up something else that I really would like to say. If you are a teenager with Tourette, and you are interested in just getting more support from other teenagers with Tourette, please look at the Tourette website and try to sign up and get to know some of the youth ambassadors or the rising leaders. These are amazing. I mean, Jane is one of the youth ambassadors, and she's had these experiences. The new Rising Leaders program is a fantastic place to, really talk to other people who have had experiences. And, you gave us a great idea. I'm going to follow up with them and see if we can get some more information and try to do a poll of any other of these high school or college students who have studied abroad, and maybe we can add some more information onto the Tourette website and share it with you and your organization as well, Justin.
That'd be great.
That's great. I actually have a question myself for Jane, and Justin too. You can chime in here. Jane, did you find that it was difficult, or were you open to discussing your Tourette with your host family? Was there like any sort of barrier in doing so? And did they make you feel like that was something comfortable that you could share?
I mean, honestly, it depends on the person. And, different people with different disabilities, they will be sometimes more open about talking about it, and they'll sometimes be more reserved or embarrassed and things like that. And either way, that's okay. I have Tourette's, and I'm perfectly fine with talking about it. I want to make sure the more people know, the easier it will be for other kids in the future to have a lot more understanding. If someone comes across my Tourette's and finds it weird or freaky or something like that, then I want to make sure to educate them about it and tell them about it, so that if they run into someone else with Tourette's in the future, they don't treat them that way. But there are a lot more people who, they might feel kind of ashamed about it and embarrassed about it and things like that. So it really depends on the person. So whatever the person is comfortable with, and if they might want their parent to speak for them or something, or if they might want, just like a copy and paste message to like email to their host parents or something like that. Like how earlier it was mentioned that they have the cards that say I have Tourette syndrome, for like if you're on a plane or something. So yeah, something like that. And honestly, with a language barrier, sometimes it can be hard. But one thing that I do recommend is basically, if you're studying the language of the country you're going to, always make sure to learn the name and maybe some different symptoms of your disability and things like that, so that you can talk about it in that language if you do need to.
That's great
Yeah,
advice.
and when Jane did study abroad, I think a lot of times, specifically for Tourette, because it is often an invisible type of challenge, I think it really put Jane's host family, and we did correspond with the director of Takeda High School several times before she went abroad. And I think it put them at ease when although symptoms, and tics will wax and wane, we did let them know these are the typical tics. These are some of the tics that Jane currently has, including, the blinking or the face, this kind of stuff. I think if you're able to, because of portrayal in the media, and especially places that aren't as aware of Tourette syndrome, people get a little bit scared. They're like, oh my gosh, is somebody going to be swearing in my house? But, so sharing with people, your host family especially, and then the host school, about your typical tics is really will go a long way to putting them at ease.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I have another question here. Jane, would you mind sharing some strategies that you have to reduce your Tourette symptoms on long international flights?
Well, okay. Well, I do have a couple of important things. So for this is like actually a really good thing that I noticed. So for those of you who have eye tics or facial tics that kind of center around your eyes or eyebrows, they can actually probably get, or any tics, I don't know, but sometimes if you feel like it might get worse if you're staring at a screen for long enough, then you can actually use blue light glasses. You can get anti-blue light glasses from Amazon or anything like that. And if you get them, basically it will not only protect your eyes from like screens and things like that from making your tics worse, but it will also help your tics with like, you know, fluorescent light and things like that. It can protect your eyes from like fluorescent lights and things like that too. And sometimes they have those on flights. I feel like the kind of light they have in there is harsh. So if you have facial tics or really any other kind of tics, I don't know what effects it has on other tics with blue light glasses, but yeah, that could be an important idea to wear blue light glasses to maybe see if it would help a little bit. And also music can help a lot. Make sure you bring headphones on your flight, especially if it's international, because oh my God, it can get really boring. So yeah, just keep yourself occupied. Maybe, you know, get a window seat. That's really important. It's like a sensory thing, to be able to, you know, watch your flight take off and land and things like that. But whatever kind of seat you like, just make sure that it is fitting for you so that you don't feel anxious or uncomfortable throughout the flight. Just make sure that you have things to do and make sure you have ways to kind of calm yourself and to tell people around you who might be worried.
And those females out there who like to wear fake eyelashes, Jane would also recommend
Oh my
don't wear
God.
fake eyelashes
I don't
during
know
the
why.
flight.
Okay, I don't know why anyone would wear fake eyelashes during a flight, Mom.
Because if they have a blinking tic, it makes it it can be really bad.
Yeah.
Thank you for everybody for attending. And yeah, I mean, again, Jane, being a youth ambassador for Tourette Association, if you have additional questions, please feel free to contact Tourette Association, and you know, we'd be happy to help however we can.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. If you have any questions, email Tourette Association. You can also drop us a line at MyUSA. And, you know, we realize maybe this is kind of an ironic time to have a webinar about traveling when traveling is restricted, but this too will pass, and there's no better time like the present to start thinking about what you're going to do in the future. So thank you, everybody, so much.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for that, Justin. And everyone stay safe and healthy. We wish you the best, and talk soon.